for everyone to, while we're waiting for everyone to join us, I wanted to make an announcement that we're going to record the meeting. So thank you, Zoom, for working on that part. Let's give folks another minute. It's great to see people coming in. Wonderful. Great. Well, I tell you what, it's 5 minutes past. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for your patience with Zoom. If you're just joining in, we are recording this session, and we appreciate you making the time to be with us today. My name is Sharon Cornu. I'm the director at St. Mary's Center. We are a community center in West Oakland, a community of hope, healing, and justice. We have operated an emergency winter shelter for many years. I see some of our strong supporters, benefactors, and funding agencies with us today. And like so many agencies across so many programs, during the pandemic, we had to pivot and reinvent the program. We've learned a great deal from that, and we were happy to have the support of the Senior Assistance Foundation of the East Bay to be able to include a professional external evaluator. And we're happy today to be sharing what we learned and where we hope to go. So thank you for joining us. I want to thank all of the St. Mary's Center staff who helped work on this report, including Tucker Broff, Nadia Stanizai. I also want to thank our clients and quote Aurelia Alejandre from our representative pay program, who always send us, we learn so much from the seniors every day. And I think that's a good piece of wisdom for us to carry forward. Also, I want to thank the team that has that you'll be hearing from during the presentation today. That will be our clinical director, Sharon Hawkins-Leiden, and Dr. Kathy Naff, who was our evaluator. We will do questions and answers at the end. And at the conclusion of the webinar, sometime this afternoon, we will email you the final report and the slides. And then somewhat later, there'll be a link to the webinar recording. So thank you again for making the time. If you're just joining us, we are recording. And we appreciate you joining us today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our clinical director, Sharon Hawkins-Leiden, to get us started.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. So what we were, as COVID hit, as obviously all of us know, we had to make a quick decision about what to do instead of congregate shelter for the obvious reasons that we were dealing with very vulnerable seniors in a congregate setting, everybody in one room. And so we decided that we really had no choice but to begin to think about how to take our services from inside of our center to outside of our center. We've been very community centered all along for decades and decades. This was a good opportunity to get out there even more. So what we wanted to make sure of was that we would stay doing a lot of work around engagement, that we would continue our services of housing navigation, making critical links to medical services, obviously housing people, because we're working with people who are homeless, and making sure people had financial stability, but also along the way providing some of the very basic essential critical services like food, and with the new acronym PPE, which you all know what that is, right? So in order to do that, though, we decided that we needed to make as many entrances and gateways into the program as possible. We wanted this to be a low barrier program. So we decided that we would obviously use some of our strengths we already had, which was taking referrals from other agencies and collaborators, making sure that we were having a phone line that was staffed a lot so that people could call in, clients, and then also taking our services out to the street. Before we could do that, though, we had to do several assessments. We had to do external assessments and internal assessments. Our external assessments were things like, who can we partner with? Who knows things better than we do, especially around the medical issues? And so we reached out to some partners around that for some advice, especially to Healthcare for the Homeless, who were doing amazing work as usual, but even more amazing work on the ground. And we also needed a van because we had a pretty dilapidated form of transportation that wouldn't have worked. We also needed to do then internal assessment of, do we have enough staff? Could we fund the staff? Do we have the right kind of staff? Because this was a different kind of a platform than we had been used to. And could our staff do outreach and engagement, which was very different than when people used to come into the shelter. And so we did a really full assessment of our current caseloads and our capacity. We also did a full assessment of the skill level of our staff. And then we also had to do a new thing under COVID, which was an assessment of the willingness of the staff to put themselves on the front lines when people were not yet vaccinated. So out of that, 3 of our 6 staff were willing and able, and that gave us enough capacity to move forward. Simultaneously, we were working with our food team led by our esteemed leader, Janie Castillo, to put food out because we had been providing food internally. So we did the same model of taking food out to the streets. And so we started having joint trainings between the food team and the senior homeless services team. What happened was that the food team got really quickly deployed and went out first. And we opened our phone lines really, really quickly, and our street outreach was going to follow after that. Well, like every plan that you put in process, especially under a COVID pandemic, things changed and things diverged. What we found, though, was that they didn't diverge negatively, but they actually diverged pretty positively. One of the 3 things is we did not go out with the medical teams that we actually thought we would. We were talking first with Healthcare for the Homeless, then with Roots. Roots was in process of changing its geographic location to Lifelong. We had lovely conversations with Lifelong, but as they were ramping up, and they were also pivoting all the time and refocusing on whether they were going to be giving vaccinations and things like that, we never could coordinate in terms of deploying onto the street together. So what we did instead is we made our connections with the medical facilities and medical centers even more stronger than they were before. So we did a huge amount of work with the Trust Clinic, with Lifelong Over 60, and with Native American Health Center. And we really made those linkages so that we could literally take clients to those appointments or set them up electronically. Now, the other piece that was different is that we thought that we would go out with the food team as well, the case managers. But because the food team was already out there and they had an outreach worker attached to them who was very familiar with a lot of settlements, we actually didn't need to go out with them except on a rare occasion, because what they did is they went out and through their distribution of supplies, PPE and food, they made connections in the settlements. So what they did a really fantastic job of is making sure that we were connected to the leaders in those settlements, and that everybody in the settlements, regardless of age, got something. And then on top of that, they were able to determine then, within conjunction with the leadership of the settlements, which seniors were wanting help, and had already identified those seniors. So they made the case manager's job super easy. When we went out, we were led directly to seniors who wanted services, who heard about us, who had a trusting relationship with St. Mary's because we've been providing food and already providing services for them. So that was very, very successful. Sadly, as we know, in the middle of December 2020, the Delta variant hit with COVID. And just as the case management team were deploying to the street to go and work with the people I just talked about, we had to pull back because it was deemed unsafe. If you can imagine that you're going out onto the street with seniors who are very hard of hearing and often have very poor eyesight, you have to get very close and personal to be able to communicate. And we didn't feel like that was safe given the protocols of 6 feet distance. And some of our clients were not masked and not able to mask, even though we had that equipment for them. So we pulled back, sadly, from the street piece, but we kept taking clients in through the phone and through referrals from other agencies. So we were working with people, and we were working with them outside in our courtyard, under tents, with heat lamps, doing everything we could to enroll people. So at this point, when everybody got vaccinated by the end of January, we went back out onto the street and we immediately signed up 11 clients within a month or 2 because they'd already been identified. We got over our cohort. We were supposed to serve 20, we ended up serving 21. And then we created a 61-person wait list. Of course, with all of the things that happen, there are missed opportunities. So some of those missed opportunities were things like we ran into tech issues. People didn't have phones. It's hard to reach people. I must say it was a little easier to find people because they moved less under COVID than they usually would. They were less transient. And there weren't sweeps and different impacts to them. So people did stay kind of put. So we were able to go out and find people, and we were very good at sort of hunting people and finding out where they were. And because we were trusted, we were passed from settlement to settlement, or they moved from here to there. So we were able to do that. The other piece was the flow of housing opportunities did slow down, permanent housing opportunities. At first it sped up in COVID, then it slowed down. So we were sort of getting people in, but the flow was really complicated, and it was harder to put people in congregate settings like transitional housing for the obvious same reasons under COVID. We made great use of hotel vouchers. Those were extremely helpful in us being able to put people into housing and get them off the street, and then also to provide them with services around medical care and respite care. So that was extremely helpful to us. So as we were able to put them in those interim hotels, we were really, really fortunate that the Lake Merritt Lodge opened. And we got all 20 of our 21 clients into the lodge. We were the first people into the lodge. And that made a huge difference in the flow. So we have places to put people interimly with the hotels, and then we have places to place people once we had identified the lodge. And I must say, just the update from the lodge is we put 20 people in there, and 15 of those 20 have got permanent housing or are about to get permanent housing. So that's a hugely high statistic. Again, thanks to the fact that there's resources and a flow. Again, it takes that village, and at any point when that flow stops, obviously things are back up. The other piece about the missed opportunity is medical care. So whilst the street outreach medical teams were doing amazing work, getting people into medical care became more and more complicated. One, because obviously everyone was triaging for COVID. So we were seeing our seniors suffer at a lot higher rates with their medical conditions, for their COPD, for their high blood pressure, diabetes. It was really hard to manage those kind of symptoms. We did a lot of advocacy and a lot of sitting on the phone with our clients to actually get phone interviews and phone consultations. That's my timer. My time is up. More sentences. I tend to go on, so I time myself. Two other pieces, and then I'm going to turn it over, is we realized that there was a greater need for a wider range of languages. We've been very used to having African-American and predominantly population. That still is true, but there was some need for languages that we were not as fully staffed on as we needed to be. And also we had to account for a lot of people who were under the age of 55. So our program criteria was 55 and older, living in Oakland, and homeless by the definition of homelessness. So at that point, people under 55, especially the 54-year-olds, got really, really upset sometimes because they really desperately needed services that we couldn't provide because of our niche. So I could say a lot more, but that's a brief overview of what we tried to do and what sort of our meandering way that we went through. It is my great pleasure to introduce now Dr. Kathy Naff, who is an evaluator and was able to come on and get some insider information for us that she's now going to report back to. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon, and good afternoon. Excuse me. The evaluation consisted of three pieces of data. The first was some hard data that we collected in spreadsheets and in the homeless management information system. The second was key informant interviews. These were some interview questions, which you'll find in an appendix of the report that you'll receive later this afternoon. And the interviews were conducted with St. Mary's staff as well as some of the partners. And the third was a excuse me, a survey that I drafted and it is also contained in an appendix of the report. And that was administered to the 20 clients who were enrolled in case management, as well as a random sample of those who were contacted through outreach, but through one reason or another were not able to enroll in case management. Could I have the next slide, Nadia, please? This shows the hard data that was excuse me, collected in the evaluation. And what it shows is, in terms of these three outcomes, we met or exceeded all of the goals that were set for the project. In particular, I'd like to focus on the third row. And you can see that we exceeded that goal by 50%. We had hoped to provide PPE, hygiene kits, and other necessities to at least 100 unsheltered seniors, and we were actually able to do so to 449 seniors. And in previous years, fiscal year 2019 to 20 and 2018 to 19, we had contacted 79 and 94 seniors respectively. So we were even able to contact more seniors than we had in previous years. We also met our goals for the number of seniors that we enrolled into housing navigation, as well as the number of seniors we placed in stable housing. So we're very pleased that we were able to meet and exceed those goals. Could you show the next slide? Excuse me. We also had goals with respect to how the seniors would, I guess you would say, react to the program. One of them was that 90% of seniors participating in housing navigation would report receiving clear communication about services and consistent, transparent follow-through. So if you focus on the first, third, and fourth purple bars in these in this graph, you'll see that actually 94% of seniors in the first bar agreed that St. Mary's had clearly communicated with them about options for services. The third bar is that 94% agreed St. Mary's was always open and honest with me. And the fourth purple bar, that St. Mary's provided consistent follow-through after the initial meeting. Another of our goals was that 90% of seniors would report that their choices would be supported by St. Mary's staff. The second purple bar, the same 94% agreed my choices have been supported by St. Mary's staff. Those blue bars are the responses of that random sample of those who had not been able to enroll in case management. And they're for probably obvious reasons, they're not quite as happy as those who had enrolled in St. Mary's in case management. But still, it's there's still quite some satisfaction there with how they were treated by the St. Mary's staff. The bottom bar there, when my choice was not available, St. Mary's staff explained the reason. 79% agreed that that was true. So there was very high level of satisfaction on the part of those who were worked with by St. Mary's staff, particularly those who were enrolled in case management. So I think that St. Mary's staff, given the circumstances of having to pivot to this new model of providing services to seniors, did a very good job of engaging the seniors and particularly those who enrolled in case management and explaining things to them and being very open and transparent. The next figure shows some demographic data about those who were served over the last 3 years. And just what I wanted to point out here is that notably this past year, 90% of St. Mary's compliant clients were Black. compared to 75% or fewer of those in the previous 2 years, providing a much greater match with the community, the Oakland community that are normally served. So going on to then the conclusions. Due to the pandemic, St. Mary's was forced to adopt a very different model, a very different way of serving clients, and yet was able to realize a comparable placement to when it was using a more traditional model. Those enrolled found it very responsive and supportive of their needs. The main referral for those who were not enrolled was 211. That did not meet with success. That St. Mary's was able to provide something to everyone via outreach to the settlements, and that increased engagement and eased the tension between the seniors and others, and provided seniors with more services. So those were the conclusions, some of the conclusions that we reached. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Sharon Cornu to talk about the recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Sharon Hawkins-Leiden. I'll review the recommendations briefly, and then we have some time for Q&A. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat, and we'll get the right person to respond to any questions that you have. Moving forward, as we look at this winter and subsequent winters, I've started to say as we come out of the pandemic, and then corrected myself because that doesn't really seem to be happening. But as we prepare for another winter season, St. Mary's will continue to evaluate the health and safety impact of congregate shelter for extremely frail elders, and look for new ways to achieve the real goals of the program, which is to place people into stable housing, into permanent housing. We see a number of our funders and supporters on the line today. I want to thank you for the work that you have done with us to get us to recommendation 2, increasing the capacity and staffing level. We've got great partners here from Alameda County, the City of Oakland, CDBG, and actually 2 members of our finance committee. So thank you very much for your work to help increase our capacity and staffing level. That remains a challenge, as it is for many organizations right now. I think some of the operational learning was about offering services universally. St. Mary's Center really focuses on seniors, but in our street outreach program, we found it was critically important to welcome all comers. We have a recommendation to collaborate with our partners to share learning. That's part of what we're kicking off today in talking with you about what we learned through this process. We look forward to hearing from other agencies. We know that there are other organizations providing shelter and homelessness services who have had to grapple with really similar issues, and we're excited to learn from each other. The next recommendation talks about expanding from our traditional 5-month emergency winter shelter into a year-round program. And I'm pleased to report that we're beginning to phase that in. We have a cohort of seniors that we are continuing to work with, as Sharon Hawkins-Leiden mentioned, those who were placed in the Lake Merritt Lodge. Thank you to everyone involved in that. There's been a great placement rate, good outcomes from that. But we still have clients we're working with from this cohort. So even though the so-called shelter season has ended, we are continuing to work with clients to place them in transitional housing to find stable and permanent homes. And then the last piece I really want to highlight, and Kathy, thank you for including that slide with our 3 years of HMIS data. It's a smaller sample size, but we really did see an increase in the number of Black seniors who were unhoused. And I see a comment here from Paul Bennett about the lower numbers of Latino population. In part, this is due to St. Mary's placement in West Oakland and our focus on seniors. In our agency overall, we tend to serve Black seniors and more Black and Latino families in our preschool. So we have sort of a demographic snapshot of the changes happening in the neighborhood by serving both preschoolers and seniors. And we are looking forward to continuing to communicate with the partners and funders who are on this call as we look forward to building out this program and making sure that we have the capacity to continue. I see Michelle Starrett. Michelle, thank you very much for the success of Measure A1 and the 2,800 new housing units that were brought online in Alameda County. Our seniors are occupying a number of them. Keep them coming. And also thanks to, we're really honored that the City of Oakland and CDBG folks are with us today, as well as other Alameda County folks. Let me stop rambling and ask if there are questions, if there are other questions at this time. As I mentioned before, if you were on the original email invitation, we'll make sure you get a copy of the finalized report and these slides. We welcome an opportunity to talk with our brother and sister organizations in Alameda County about what they're learning and how we can continue to improve our programs and make sure that everyone has a place to call home. Yes, I see a question from Paul Bennett.
Yeah, I actually put it in the chat, but to repeat, I'm glad to see your comment around expanding the program from partial to full year. Do you have the funding commitments to support that?
So everyone, this is from the St. Mary's Finance Committee. And Paul, we will continue that conversation when the Finance Committee meets in 3 weeks. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I could say a little something about the
Yes.
population on the streets, if you'd like.
Yes.
I'm Latina myself, so this is a question that I actually ask in certain circles. The culture, Latinos, they have a tendency to come together and live 3 families. So we do have less folks living outside. What I have seen in my outreach work to the settlements is that our Latino people sometimes hide away from folks because maybe some of them are, I will never say all of them illegal, but they are not gonna be as forthcoming to speak to folks. They often come together in small settlements throughout the city, and they have that kind of are barriers to them from the public so as not to be picked up. So we do have Latinos out there. They're a little harder to find. And thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for that very much. There's another question about lessons learned or best practices on referring clients successfully who were not eligible primarily by age. Sharon H.L., do you want to say a little bit about warm handoffs and what we learned there?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And it's really a sort of a yes and question, right? It's like, yes, the partnerships that we have made both on our end and from the collaborations we do with other agencies got stronger, hence like the Trust Clinic and Lifelong Over 60 and Native American. But the housing piece was more complicated. Obviously, we made really strong connections with Housing Consortium of the East Bay when they stood up the lodge in conjunction with all of the other resources that went into that. But I think that it's much more complicated with the housing piece of how to make those connections and to find out what other resources, because everyone is so resource poor in that department. So the only resource we really have then was to make referral to people to call 211. Whilst what Allison and everyone at 211 does is fantastic, it is limited in that it only can offer what it has to offer. And as we know, the need and the capacity are not a match. So that's where people get frustrated. And also we saw some, just like our shelter changed, other places changed. So other resources that we would have referred people to, Richmond Rescue, St. Vincent de Paul, though they did stay open for a bit, were even more limited because of, for the same reasons that we were limited with our shelter under COVID and the congregate setting. So it is a gap. it feels quite inadequate to be able to say to people call on 211 because they've already called 211 many, many times. So it's not 211's failure, it's that there's these other system gaps that we're all trying very desperately to work with.
Thank you. I want to keep us moving along. I'm going to take a question from the chat, and then a couple of people have raised their hands. Thank you to Lara Tannenbaum for your support of the program, also for your thought partnership, because you were a vital partner as we reimagined a lot of this work. And Lara asks, there may not be a new Lake Merritt Lodge waiting this year. How will that influence outcomes? And briefly, I'll say that St. Mary's currently has some capacity in our transitional housing. We have a pipeline, and our clinical team is working to access people from that pipeline with our transitional housing. And we'll be looking to see what the city of Oakland can accomplish with the governor's home key program, Laura, and what the timeline looks like for that. And it absolutely will have an impact. We had, that was a very valuable resource for us this past year. It's probably a good segue to what Michelle Starrett wants to say. Michelle?
Sorry, I was on mute. Actually, I agree. There's not enough housing, and so I am a huge supporter of getting more home key projects done. And it really is right now we're limited by operating subsidies and how to keep those buildings operating because there just isn't enough of that very critical resource. But I actually had a question about coordinated entry and how you are in alignment or working with coordinated entry. So I could take that question later if you want to continue that conversation.
I think coordinated entry is a topic for an entire day on its own. And we would look forward to having that conversation. If I can, let me go to Cheryl Kamina. Cheryl, and thank you for all of your help. And we appreciate your support from CDBG. Did you have a question?
Yeah, yes, it goes to the recommendations. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on incorporate greater analysis of outcomes by race, gender, income, and health status.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We are so appreciative of Kathy Knapp's work in this past year during the pandemic when we were all honestly scrambling quite often to reinvent programs and to keep services moving. And she had a fairly constrained scope from us in terms of looking, were we able to perform comparable services to what we've been able to perform before. I think as we move forward, St. Mary's really wants to pick up data and evaluation as an ongoing part of all of our programming and to incorporate a greater analysis in that way. We had the striking incident of the increase in the number of Black seniors in this small sample size. We don't know if that's representative. We certainly know that African American and Indigenous peoples are overrepresented among the homeless population based on all of the point in time counts and other information. But our tracking and analysis did not disaggregate that data and look closely by race, by gender, by income, and by health status. And so we'll want to incorporate some of those factors moving forward to understand what programmatic interventions are most appropriate and most beneficial, and to understand how to tailor our program to the folks who need it most. I think that is something that all of our organizations are really grappling with. We can see very clearly the racial disparities and the differences in outcomes. Operationally, how to change programs to get better outcomes across all demographics is a conversation that we want to have, and a piece of learning that really should be informed by more data and evaluation. And Cherville, we'd love to talk to community development block grants about how to support that work.
Sure, thank you for that.
Great. Are there other questions? We really appreciate everyone who was able to join us today. I want to thank the staff team again and all of the seniors who participated in the program and everyone who helped help it to operate during a very challenging year. We really look forward to continued conversation and learning, and we will make sure that you get a copy of the report and these slides. With that, I think we can sign off. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.